Hello, everyone. This is perhaps the video that many of you have been waiting for. This is day one of preparing for the TOC topic. I've done two things today, or I have done one. I will have done two by the end of this video. The first one is I've done a lot of research about examples of nuclear power plants in the US. My goal is to eventually research every nuclear power plant in the world, because I think that would provide incredible background information, and I'll put it all in this document. This kind of takes inspiration from the matter files that I've seen in BP, like Ryan Lafferty's. Um, it's just a bunch of notes with a few links scattered about, but most of it is just notes on things that I've researched. So for example, you can see I started this document with some research about the most recent nuclear power plants that have been completed in the US or started in the US, about some prominent companies, research into small modular reactors in the US, a lot of past government investments into nuclear energy so that we can figure out a little bit of the historical precedent for what the most probable implementation of the resolution would be. And then just a bunch of different nuclear power plants and a bunch of things about them. So just a bunch of facts that might be relevant to the topic. The goal is to construct a file of as many examples as I can find, and then hopefully eventually figure out, I'll add to each example as I come across more and more arguments on the topic to see if any of these plants could function as good examples for those arguments. So by the end of this, I will have like a document with a bunch of different arguments, and then I'll have like a list of examples of which power plants I think are good examples and counter examples for each argument. And then also if you just do this kind of research, I think you'll be a demon in Crossfire, which I know doesn't matter that much to people. But it's useful. The second reason that this is useful, the reason that this is probably even more useful for technical debate, is because a lot of people think that there's a burden of providing at least some evidence for most arguments, or they think that this massively increases the power of your argument. And the thing is, the burden is quite low, especially in rebuttal. If you just give one example of a power plant that supports your position, then suddenly you have evidence for your argument and they don't have evidence for the responses to the arguments. And so if you just know a lot about different nuclear power plants and examples of things that have happened there, it's very easy for you to add evidence to random arguments that you can make, which could help you a lot, even if you don't have other articles that say that your arguments are true. So I think this is useful. It also just grounds all of the rest of your research in actual examples and facts, which can help guide the rest of your research. The second thing that I want to do, the main content of this video, is I want to write an AF. I'm going to write the most stock AF. Well, maybe it'll start as stock as I can. So it's literally just we affirm contention one. I've been toying with the idea of no longer saying we affirm because that's policy language that technically is not really like I don't know why it exists in PF, but I'll keep it for now because I guess it's the norm. Contention one is warming. We'll change it later to make the tag more interesting, the title of this contention. Okay, so the first thing that I need to do is figure out uniqueness, link, impact. So uniqueness, link, impact. Although I think in this topic, and in all topics actually, the impact is less important than the weighing, especially nowadays. Like everyone is going to have an extinction impact. And I don't really want to stop there because that's not very helpful to me. I want to make sure that I have an impact that is specifically built up enough in the case that I can prove that it's the most important later in the round, even when they have extinction scenarios as well. So really, I might replace this with just weighing. So uniqueness, link, weighing. I might also play with the order of this. I kind of feel like for a warming argument, I kind of want the weighing at the top and then the uniqueness link. So I just won't put an impact at the bottom. I'll just have that stuffed in the weighing. Um, the impact, the internal link stuff under the link will be there. So I'll have an argument about how to what degree I'm able to solve the problem. But I'll put most of the weighing up here. So this is more like weighing harms solvency kind of structure. So the weighing that I want This is the first thing that I want to think about because I'm pretty sure the rest of this is easier. Like, in my opinion, if I if I'm able to win that warming is the most important, I will probably be able to win warming in the round. So I want to invest a lot of time here. So first of all, I'll probably, yes, I have an extinction impact. We are on the same level playing field. So this is just to make sure they don't like auto outweigh and then say, oh, I have extinction, you don't have extinction. Um, so I'll just put that in. The next thing that I'll add is the real comparisons. So one thing that I think would help me compare later, obviously we don't know what arguments they're going to run yet, so this isn't going to be proper comparative weighing, but I want to add as many things here that will help me do that comparative weighing later. So one thing that warming is really helpful at doing as an impact scenario is I can kind of laundry list different internal links. So hopefully I will control their link. Uh, what are some examples? War, econ, biodiversity, um, politics, just like as many different links that can branch out and steal some of their impact scenarios as well. Oh, also like um, what is it called? Misaligned AI, things like that, I think would be very good. So then I will hopefully then be able to say, I have a link into their impact scenario. And then the tiebreakers are A, I have a link into your impact as well. And either that link into their impact will be one of these. So then I'll just directly have it in here in the case, and then it's easy. Or I will just use one of these or multiple to link into their impact, which will also probably be very easy with just some logic, maybe a card. So I have a link into your impact as well. Um, I win the weighing because A, uh, I have your impact plus, right? So, and other impacts, which means, we both link into this extinction scenario, but I also link into these other like 12 extinction scenarios. So I win. And B, I have a greater link into that extinction scenario. For example, scope here is a good one. Scope and maybe time frame are pretty good, right? Like the warming argument links into their link scenario every year, increasingly into the future. Whereas usually the neg link scenario is like a one-time thing. And scope is pretty easy as well. We can link into their internal link um, in every different country in the world because climate change affects the whole world instead of just one or two or whatever the countries their link scenario is talking about. And this will make it easy to steal some of their extinction scenarios and have pretty clear weighing against them. Um, the one thing I need to insulate myself against is the time frame stuff. Like people saying, oh, well, mine happens first, because the neg is probably going to win that almost every time in any topic, really. Um, I'll obviously respond to that when they make the argument, but it's probably to their advantage to say that the faster extinction is more important. So I'll just beat time frame and preempt it here. So I'll just make the observation that like given that nothing has 100% probability, um, time frame is a lower consideration compared to the probability of extinction in the first place. That's what really matters after all. And this seems like sufficient. Maybe I'll put in like you know, assuming that their argument is certain, requires judge intervention. Authors say might, could, and also just don't have a crystal ball. And then I'll maybe leave it at that. I think that's sufficient for now. So I think if I have all of this stuff, I'm set up from constructive to have a very easy time with weighing later in the round. So I'm happy with that. I'll find cards for all of this later, probably one card for extinction, one card for a laundry list. It could be the same card. That would be nice for efficiency. And then I don't think I even need a card for this one. I'll just make the argument. And hopefully that will be pretty small. Um, the next step is uniqueness. So we need to say, without nuclear energy, we're screwed. I think this is one of the easiest parts of the argument. So the first step that I need is um, we are headed for more fossil fuels. We are headed for more fossil fuels. I would like evidence that says this. I would also like Trump will lock this in the absence of nuclear energy. For example, I want to set this up to be like we have a choice between increasing funding for fossil fuels or using that money for nuclear instead. This also will set up my link later, which makes it pretty easy. And it makes the uniqueness great because it means even if we're doing great right now, we are about to increase funding for fossil fuels, which seems true. So maybe I'll have like two cards for this. One card that says fossil fuels are increasing, and then a second card that says Trump will increase fossil fuels. Cool. Cool, cool. The next thing that I need is fossil fuels are really bad. Um, they are the primary driver of warming, plus maybe a bunch of other bad stuff. I want to focus mostly on warming though, so I might not even include the other stuff. Although it might be useful to have for extra sneaky weighing, like if they really go all in on warming, I can use some of the sneaky like secondary impacts of fossil fuels specifically, and then ditch warming, go for those, and then link those into their impact scenarios, which would be another way to win. But I don't really feel like I need to do that, so I might instead use my time in the constructive doing other things instead. We'll see how I feel strategically, but that would be an interesting strategy. Fossil fuels are really bad. They're the primary driver of warming. I think this is quite easy to prove. So I'll just probably put one card here, just like climate change is real. And this insulates me a little bit against some of the crazier like climate change is not real or climate change is good or whatever arguments. So I'll put some science in there at the bare minimum. Um, and is this all I need? For now, I think this is all I need for the uniqueness. Um, so then that locks in warming. So then I'll say like it's try or die. Like the combination of this and this means that it's try or die. I don't even need an extra card for this. So I'll just say that. Then I need the link. So I've got uniqueness, I've got weighing. I need the link. So this is the solvency. I think there's a lot of different things I can say here. One of the links is um, investment trade-off, like government investment trade-off. So this is like, I don't even need to win that there's more nuclear energy, just like there will be funds diverted from fossil fuels or funds that otherwise would have been added to fossil fuels. Cool. That's enough for a first link. The other links are even more intuitive, like we there's finite energy demand, so we don't need as much fossil fuels, aka the market for fossil fuels will shrink and prices will decrease. Like that, well, yeah, demand for fossil fuels will decrease. So fewer, expansions of fossil fuels will occur. That means extraction, that means whatever, um, which means lower emissions. Great. These are two pretty good links. Maybe I can think of others later, but I think this is good for now. And then I just need evidence that says, so this is the first part, right? The link actually has two parts. The first part is nuclear energy means, so I guess voting pro means less fossil fuels. Great. The second part is nuclear energy is cleaner than fossil fuels. And I guess notably, I only need this if I'm going for the second link. Because, like, for example, I could concede defense that says we don't actually result in more nuclear energy, in which case the first link triggers, and I don't even need to compare them. But that also opens me up to other harms like econ problems and stuff. So probably I want something that says nuclear energy is the best, evidence that it's the cleanest in life cycle emissions, hopefully evidence that accounts for everything. That would be great. Um, Really, I only need evidence that it's cleaner than fossil fuels. I would like to know how much too. A big number would make me happy there. Um, cool. I think the next thing that I would love to have is just like evidence, hopefully empirical evidence that nuclear energy has decreased fossil fuels in the past, or even better, that investment into nuclear energy has decreased fossil fuels in the past. If I have that, then it will protect my link against a lot of responses. And then this is everything I technically need to win. So the next thing that I'll think about is all of the responses to be ready for. So one response, I mean, let's just think of as many reasonable ones as we can. I think the most likely one is just renewable energy is increasing now, is cleaner than nuclear energy, is faster than nuclear energy, and there is a trade-off in investment or just like demand between them. Um, so this will be kind of on the uniqueness level here. And then on the link level, sort of as well. But mostly, I think it's on the uniqueness level. So we can respond to that in the uniqueness, maybe going between the uniqueness and the link or something. So maybe after this, right? We know fossil fuels are really bad. Maybe before this, actually, we're headed for more fossil fuels. Um, I should say, like, so I'll put renewables answers here. One, we're not headed for more renewables. For example, Trump is gutting them. Two, renewables are not very viable at displacing fossil fuels. And I would love some evidence for that. One interesting thing that I could do on the link as well is I could say voting pro solves existing problems with renewables. Nuclear energy unlocks renewable potential. There's some arguments about how they're complementary. Nuclear energy is like a base load for renewables, so that might also help me. So that's the first one, renewable energy stuff. I guess there's also implicit in that there's this time frame argument. Like the argument is climate change. We need to reduce emissions now. If we wait, it's too late because of like tipping points. So I think we could respond to this as well. So this is probably on the link level, right? Maybe right here, like at the end, A2 takes too long. Um, Maybe one, we can say tipping points are scalar and uncertain. It's definitely not true that a better solution later, like a more potent solution later, is necessarily worse than a weak solution now. Um, I guess the way to phrase this is it's not try or die for the next 10 years or something. Um, but two is also just like more investment speeds up the process, and nuclear energy can be deployed quickly with government support. New models, SMRs, are quick, and then hopefully some empirical evidence that indicates that that's the case. I think that would be good, and then that's probably sufficient for the time frame stuff. Um, the next response is like climate change is already irreversible. And then also just like you don't solve climate change very much because of uh, tons of other factors like other countries. So there's two ways we can address all of this. Um, I mean, one way is we could just put evidence that says climate change is not irreversible right now. I don't think that really matters, though. I think the big thing is that in either the weighing or the link, probably, I mean, honestly, this could go anywhere. This could be in the uniqueness as well, that it can get worse, you know. But regardless, we need to claim somewhere that climate change is very scalar. I think we put it in the link, to be honest. Like, I think we should just admit here, like, yes, we won't solve the entire problem of climate change, of warming, but one, it's very scalar, both in the like short-term magnitudes. This is like the air pollution, millions of lives stuff, and in terms of the probability of extinction. And maybe I move the tipping points here. Yeah. Okay. That seems good. And then two, oh, I could say two is just like US investment in nuclear sets an example for the rest of the world. It's a step in the right direction. And maybe like stimulates clean energy competition, healthy clean energy competition with other powers like China. There's a whole bunch of responses I actually forgot about. Let's add those in. Those are responses that say it's all like the nibs, right? Like increasing investment does not mean more nuclear energy output because of like a bunch of different factors, right? There's like the eminent domain stuff, there's regulatory burdens, just like project abandonment, um, because of cost overruns, delays, lawsuits. I don't know. There's like a million different things, right? Change in administration, political volatility, um, like disasters overseas, draining public support. Also just like low public support in general, protests, that kind of stuff. I think that's one kind of response. There's a whole other kind of response that says increasing investment from the government equals less nuclear energy or worse nuclear energy, which would obviously be a link turn to this argument as well as most F arguments. There's a lot of reasons for this as well, like maybe it creates a bubble or Trump takes the lead, which leads to a worse nuclear energy sector, or I don't know, a million different arguments. What are the other ones? Oh yeah, just like nationalization worse than privatization, like market distortion type stuff. There's a bunch of stuff like that. I think that these arguments are largely wrong. So the only thing that we need to beat all of these arguments, I guess the best thing would be to have two things. We need uniqueness and link about how this actually impacts nuclear energy. So in the uniqueness, we're headed for more fossil fuels. The first thing we need here is actually nuclear high now. So we just need evidence that says um, absent government investment, uh, like nuclear is not high. So there's maybe two things we can find. One is nuclear is suffering in the SQO or will suffer soon. And two is evidence that current nuclear growth, if it's not suffering, depends on a substantial future increase in government investment. It might be the case that investors are currently assuming that the pro will happen. Either of those or both of those would be sufficient. So that's good for uniqueness. And then the link would just be, let's see, probably the start of the link says voting pro means more and maybe better if we want to throw that in as a spike as well, nuclear energy. The most important thing that we need is empirical evidence from the history of the US and from other countries. If we can just have an immense amount of empirical evidence, and then we should have a warrant here that's just like, why does the nuclear sector uniquely depend on government investment? The answer is probably something to do with like high upfront costs, etc. And then that should be sufficient. If we have enough empirical evidence, then we can just say, we have a warrant why we need more government investment. They have a warrant why government investment will be bad. You should look at the empirics, and we have better empirics, and that'll be an easy tiebreaker. I also think the story is pretty intuitive, just like it's very difficult throughout an entire round to say that like government investment will be bad for nuclear energy, in my opinion. So that should be enough to handle both of these. The nib will be handled by the link, and this will be handled by both the link and the uniqueness. Okay. What else do we need to answer? I guess there's some other stuff, like there's some random like warming is fake news and warming is good. I think these arguments are very easily answered by the evidence we're already going to put in here. Like all of the evidence in the weighing will be an answer to warming good. And then the evidence that says like fossil fuels actually lead to climate change and climate change is real, that should answer the warming is fake. So that's done. I think that's easy. The next arguments, there'll be a lot of link turns. Oh, there's like the oil lobbying stuff. Like there will be political concessions. I think this is one that we can respond to after they make it largely, but we could add something like a little spike in here on the link level maybe that says reducing government investment in fossil fuels. Like this is the only way to reduce the fossil fuel lobby, which is maxed out in the SQO. So that will be a little spike that beats their argument and also gives us an additional, sort of an additional link. It's more of an additional internal link. So that should be enough to deal with the oil lobbying stuff. What are the other arguments they might make? They might make an argument about the environmental movement will be fractured. I don't think we need to worry about this. I think the easiest thing here is just to say that like it doesn't matter what the environmental movement thinks because nuclear energy is key to fighting warming, and there's nothing else that we can do instead. So they would have to win this, and that there's other solvency that the environmental movement would actually be able to get, which I think is unrealistic. But I think this is one that we can just answer on the line by line, and we don't have to. This is not like a burden of our argument. The next argument that they might make is, oh yeah, just like nuclear energy is dirty. So this is like uranium mining. This is stuff about lots of stuff. Uranium mining, construction, waste, maintenance, shipping of fuel, like all of these things release emissions. I think we already beat this though, because we just have a card that should account for all of this, like the life cycle emissions card. Where is that? On the link, this one here. It's the cleanest and life cycle emissions. If we want, we can also add evidence that says nuclear is better in general than other energy, especially for our argument, fossil fuels. For example, less waste, it's less space, less materials, less construction, more efficient. Like all of those things will just turn every one of those arguments for the most part. And I think that would be an additional spike that's easy. I think that's optional though, because we don't really need that if we have the life cycle emissions card, because that should account for the weighted like emissions from those sources. Um, that's most of it, I think. I'm trying to think of other responses that they might read. Um, let's see. Maybe, I mean, there's some other random stuff like carbon capture will solve. I think that's one we can just respond to when they make it. Or there's like the SO2 screw like fast warming argument. If you don't know this argument, it's like if we shut fossil fuel plants, they stop releasing as much sulfur dioxide or like aerosols and stuff. And if we stop releasing as much of those, then it actually very quickly warms the planet. But the answer to this is just that the fast warming doesn't matter very much because this it only lasts for like it leaves the atmosphere incredibly quickly, so it doesn't matter very much. Um, it doesn't actually link into the feedback loops. But I don't know. This is also one that you could just answer on the line by line. So I think that most of these responses um, we can deal with pretty easily, especially with empirics. Like the only other responses I can think of is like nuclear energy has inherent problems that prevent it from functioning. I know that there's arguments like the water gets too hot, etc. And if we just have the empirics in there that says it has worked in the past to displace fossil fuels, then we should be chilling. So why did I do all of this? This is a lesson that I kind of learned from world schools and BP debate, which is like fill all of the burdens of your arguments. So one way to do that is think of all of the intuitive responses and all of the non-intuitive responses. This performs a double function. One, it means that we can run this case in front of any judge, including lay judges, and we can insulate ourselves from intervention. But two, we can spike out almost all of the common responses without even reading anything new. So this allows us to frontline from the opposite direction. Like we're not reading new evidence or any new responses against their responses. We're just saying that our case accounted for them already, which is much more efficient and it's cleaner because they've already conceded those things. And so it's very difficult for them to beat our case. And then if we have this weighing, this should be a direct path to victory, regardless of what they run. So this strategy should insulate us from anything they do. Like we should be ready for anything that they possibly could throw at us, which would make this, I think, very strategic. Okay, I'm back. I've done a lot. So the first thing that I did is I actually went through the outline that we just made before of like all the weighing stuff, the uniqueness, the link, everything. And then I decided what do I actually need cards for? And so then I went up here and I just made a list in rough order of all the cards I thought I would probably use, that I thought I could pretty easily find. So we've got all the warming, like is the most important stuff. So it causes extinction, laundry list of different impacts that I can use them against their extinction scenarios. Then the uniqueness, fossil fuels growing, Trump's going to invest more in them, not renewables, and they're not very good. Renewables don't displace fossil fuels. I wanted to, I sort of played with the order a little bit here because I thought about like technically the renewables are not good and nuclear energy is low now. Like all of that stuff sort of goes in the uniqueness section. You can see though that I've moved it around. So here's the start of the uniqueness for nuclear energy specifically, but here's the uniqueness for renewables, and here's the uniqueness for fossil fuels. And so the uniqueness for fossil fuels and renewables is sort of above the uniqueness for nuclear, and there's a link in between, which is a little bit weird, I think, for some people. But I decided that narratively, I think it flows better to have it this way because I want to put all the renewable stuff together. We have renewables are not good, so uniqueness for renewables, and then the sort of solvency cards that say that actually renewables actually like improve when you have more nuclear energy. So this stuff is like a link card, and this stuff is also a link card that's just empirical evidence that proves this one. Um, and I thought that that would be a very helpful strategy. And the ordering there, I think, just makes more sense if you put it all together. I felt like it would be awkward to put like nuclear is low above that. And then we have the nuclear stuff, like it will increase when you have more investment. That seems a little bit trivial, but some people might run arguments that it doesn't happen. And then all of this stuff that says empirically it's worked, empirically it does reduce fossil fuels, and it's the cleanest, it's the best. Fossil fuels are terrible, and then a bunch of air pollution scalar cards. Like these are basically all cards that just say that the impact is scalar, and so it doesn't matter if I don't solve the whole thing. Um, I thought maybe it would have been a good idea to also add a card about how like the US sets an example for other countries or maybe like induces more green tech competition with like China. Those cards are definitely out there, probably pretty easy to find, but I just was a little bit lazy, so I didn't find that. But oh boy, the things that I did find, I think were quite good. I think I kind of locked in here today. So I'll show you all the evidence that I cut. I cut basically all the evidence that I said that I was going to cut, and a little bit more, a little bit differently. I think a little bit more strategic than I had originally planned. But I'm pretty happy with what I found. So I'll show you exactly what I found here, and I'll sort of explain the strategic rationale for each part. The first one is the one that I told you I would put, which is like, who cares about their extinction impact? Of course, everyone has one. But this one actually links into like all of the other extinction scenarios, and so it's a more likely like A, I'll probably steal yours, but B, this has like a greater chance of actually linking into a risk of extinction than theirs does. This helps me do some comparative weighing later in the round very easily. This talks about tipping points. It talks about all sorts of different follow-on effects to climate change, and it also just says it probably might cause human extinction, which that's all the stuff that I really needed it to do. Um, then I thought of a really interesting strategy, which is to use maybe an animal impact um, off of climate change. So I thought, like, of course, everyone is going to have a human extinction impact, but not everyone is going to have like an animal extinction impact. And technically, the Baudrillard, or not the Baudrillard, the Bostrom stuff, the extinction calculus, it applies equally to humans and animals. Maybe not exactly equally, but the same logic applies, right? That like, if you cause the extinction of a species of animal, that potentially takes away like trillions of future lives that otherwise would have existed in future generations. And so I found this evidence that says basically there's a scalar relationship between higher temperatures around the world, like more climate change, and a greater amount of species extinctions, which is a great impact that is A, very scalar, and B, I can use to outweigh human extinction pretty easily as a numbers game, as long as I win that like animals matter or should be included in our util calculations, which I think is incredibly easy to win. If anyone has any questions about how to win that, you can ask me because I have a lot of thoughts. But I think that's one of the easiest arguments to prove in a debate. So that gives me a great way to beat a lot of the impacts from the other side. So these two cards combined make it very easy, I think, to win the round if I'm able to win warming. So then the rest of this is just, can I win warming? Here's my uniqueness. This is pretty trivial. Fossil fuels are rising despite renewables. Trump is poised to increase them even more, and he's not going to do anything with renewables. He'll probably cut renewables instead. Even if renewables were an option, okay, this I was kind of cooking with. This card is awesome. Even if renewables were an option, they increase emissions right now. A 1% increase in renewables increases carbon emissions 1.4%. And it says obviously this finding is not consistent with general expectations, but guess what? It is consistent with this paper and this paper and this paper and this paper. So there's apparently an abundance of empirical evidence this is true in advanced developed economies. And the reason that it gives is sort of a little bit weak. It's just like renewable energy also produces emissions, which makes sense because you have to construct it and maintain it and do all those things that are also energy intensive and might release emissions in the process. But it becomes much more obvious why this is the case when you combine it with the next card. This card, I think, is there are two cards in this like card dump here that I think were like actually incredibly good. And this is one of them. This card says um, that right now, in most countries, renewable energy does not displace fossil fuels. The reason why is because as energy increases, we kind of just use more. When we use more solar energy, for example, we just add that. It doesn't displace existing energy, which is a little bit puzzling, but it says that basically uh, renewables do not significantly displace fossil fuels. So it's not really a viable solution to the current problem of emissions. However, here's the thing. This article says when you have nuclear energy as well, This changes. When you have nuclear energy, the deployment of renewables suddenly starts to displace fossil fuels. And also, competition between nuclear and renewables is diminishing. This is awesome because the greatest threat, I think, to this argument that everyone is always going to run is that renewable energy is going to be crowded out by nuclear energy and that renewable energy is better. So this allows you to say, no, your renewable energy in the absence of as much nuclear energy is actually much worse. It's not very effective at displacing fossil fuels. But here's the kicker. Our renewable energy, not only does it not trade off, but our renewable energy, when you introduce nuclear energy to the mix, actually does do a good job of reducing fossil fuels. Now, why is this the case? The warrant is right here. It says that there's a preference among decision makers. So we're thinking policymakers, but also like the executives of utility companies and other people like that. There's a preference among them for non-fossil fuel sources of electricity, aka renewables, in nations that have a viable alternative with which to meet baseload demand, e.g., nuclear. So, what does this mean? If you have something other than fossil fuels that is generating electricity continuously all the time for a baseload, then suddenly decision makers are okay with reducing fossil fuels. This seems to signal a certain anxiety around reducing baseload energy when you're relying on intermittent energy. Even if there are solutions to intermittency problems, decision makers seem to have an anxiety around relying exclusively on intermittent energy, which is one of the reasons why there is not a very strong displacement effect of renewable energy when there is not an alternative for baseload power that might be invested in, like nuclear energy. And then it goes on to say that renewable sources have begun to displace fossil fuels in nuclear producing nations specifically, but not in the rest of the countries, which suggests that infrastructural path dependency has insulated fossil fuels from competition outside of the nations that have nuclear energy, which is an excellent card. The hard part is proving that this is like a scalar thing. The next card attempts to do that a little bit, but regardless, I think that this evidence is fantastic. It suggests that nuclear energy modulates the effect that renewables have on fossil fuels and sort of unlocks their potential to actually start reducing emissions actively by displacing fossil fuel energy. The next card is a quantification of that effect that I found. It's very explicit. It says that a nuclear renewable mix is the best, that nuclear energy will assist with renewable displacement of fossil fuels by generating with the same warrant, right? By generating power continuously. And specifically, it quantifies this. And it says, for example, for solar, it decreases the amount of solar energy required to displace 1 unit of energy of fossil fuels by 6 times. So you need 6 times less solar energy to displace the same amount of fossil fuels after you introduce nuclear energy, which is crazy. That's huge. That means even if we, for example, get rid of like cut the amount of renewable energy in half after we introduce nuclear, this still outweighs that effect. It's still, even if we have half as much renewable energy, if it's 6 times better at displacing fossil fuels, that's still a net improvement in the positive effect of renewable energy, which is huge and definitely outweighs any links that they go for in renewables. The next part is oh yeah, this is all the nuclear stuff. So we have a pretty good card for the uniqueness. It says that yes, there's a little bit of momentum, but that momentum is entirely dependent on uncertain federal support, mostly in the form of subsidies, which sounds like investment to me. I think you can interpret this as if we don't vote pro and we don't increase investment in nuclear energy, then the momentum will largely stop. Also, there's 2 cards here that basically say you need government support for nuclear energy because of high upfront costs for funding. And this one has empirical, I mean, there's so many empirical examples. I think literally every example of a nuclear power plant has had some level of government involvement. But these are some empirical examples of countries that have, including the US, which have successfully used government like involvement and investment to increase their nuclear programs, which means that you can use this empiric against any sneaky arguments from the neg or from the con that say that actually an increase in investment might decrease nuclear energy. You can be like, even if there are reasons why this might decrease nuclear energy, there are better reasons why it increases nuclear energy. And if you look at the historical record, uh, clearly the the reasons that it increases nuclear energy are greater than the reasons that it doesn't. The next cards are about empirical evidence of nuclear expansion successfully displacing fossil fuels. This one is only about coal, and I think there are some problems with this evidence, but it's pretty good. The next piece of evidence, I said that there are two that are so good. This is the second one. It is a study of France and Sweden, which why France and Sweden? It's because those countries are the ones that had the biggest substantial expansions of nuclear energy in history. Um, it says if the rest of the world expanded nuclear energy at the same rate as Sweden and France did, we could eliminate all fossil fuels in less than 10 years. In the most conservative estimates, it would take 20 to 30 years. But if they're right about their assumptions, it could be less than 10 years. That is crazy. That's insane. And it goes on to say, this is the same evidence. It goes on to give this like long explanation about the Swedish program, for example. I think there's another one later in the card about the French program, but this is crazy. This is actually such an incredible example. It says that Sweden decreased its emissions by 75% without even trying. Literally, it says the reduction in CO2 emissions was not an objective, but rather a fortunate byproduct. They accidentally decreased their carbon emissions by 75%. And one of the biggest problems with like decreasing emissions is that the problem is, and this is one of the problems with renewable energy as well, when you add more low carbon energy, you expand the economy and then people use more energy, which means you don't reduce emissions. The problem is that there's a coupling between the amount of like how rich your country is and how much emissions that you have. Um, and this is like the one case in history where they were able to decouple them. They doubled their economy while having a decrease in emissions by 75%. That's crazy. And they did it in like 10 years. This is the most rapid installation of low carbon electricity capacity of any nation in history, which also I think solves our time frame problems because it compares it against any other nation's rollout of renewable energy, for example, which would also be low CO2 electricity capacity. And this is because again we have an empiric about displacement of fossil fuels, dropped oil by 40% while increasing electricity consumption. That's like insane. That is a feat. So if Sweden could do it, we can do it. The rest of the card also concludes that it should be even easier for us today because of new technology. So I think this is one of the best cards that you could have. Then you have some other trivial cards that I think a lot of people have. It's just, nuclear is much cleaner, accounting for every factor. It's the best. Renewable energy isn't enough, even with batteries. It's the safest kind. It's better than fossil fuels in every single way, including waste, including accidents. It's like 2,500 times less likely to kill people per unit of energy produced. We have a trivial card that says fossil fuels cause climate change. We have a lot of scalar cards here. So these are all the sort of the air pollution cards. This one says every 4,000 metric tons of carbon kills one person. So any little difference makes, people die. It's life or death. Nuclear energy has saved 42 million lives in 20 years by displacing fossil fuels. There's the 1 in 5 people die from air pollution, which is insane. It kills 15 times more than all wars and violence combined. And then this card at the very end, that's this sort of scalar, like it adds the scalarity to the tipping points argument. So it says every like zero point 0.1 degree of warming massively increases the risk of passing tipping points, which means this is basically a card to say that like, look, extinction is not guaranteed in the status quo, obviously. Um, but it could be that we are going to go extinct in the status quo, and it could be that any small change in emissions might be the thing that like pushes us into extinction or away from extinction. And so the probability, the percent chance of extinction changes pretty massively with every small change in emissions. Um, I think that's quite effective if you couple it with just the obvious observation in the debate that like their arguments do not start at 100% probability. I think it requires judge intervention to get them there. So then we have all of these cards. The obvious problem with this partly is intentional, which is that These all are like way too long. If you try to read all of these, it should take like 9 minutes, which is too long for a constructive speech. Plus, you probably need extra things. This is intentional, right? Like, I don't want you to copy my stuff. Here's again the shell that I wrote that says, please don't copy my prep without transformative changes of your own. If you do cut it down a little bit, it might look something like this. All of these are still cut cards. I just haven't like put the cut cards in here. What I mean by this is that this is still only using the words from the card. I just haven't put the cut cards in here so that you are not maybe as tempted to steal them. You should cut them down yourselves, right? If you want to use some, and don't use like all of them, or don't use like you should intersperse them with your own evidence if you're going to use them. But this is an example of how this case would actually look. This is only 814 words. I could probably cut it down even further if I wanted to. It's all cut cards, and I think I fit almost all of the cards in here, all of the ones that are important, certainly, plus a bunch of extra stuff. Like I've got this like preempt to time frame weighing here. And I think this sets you up very well for success. The only thing I would add is like spills over to other countries, and then you're probably set. Um, but this is, I think, a good AF contention. I think that this is my favorite AF argument or pro argument. So I had a lot of fun prepping it. Hopefully, this helps you with your own prep. By the way that I got all of this evidence, like literally for a lot of the most effective evidence, specifically the two that I was ranting about that I really like, I literally just looked up like nuclear fossil fuel displacement or just the words fossil fuel displacement. And then I read like 6 or 7 papers, and those two happened to be in those 6 or 7. I think that stuff is like super effective at actually getting to the root of the link that you're trying to prove, which is not just that it's clean or that it's not dirty or whatever, but that it displaces dirtier energy to decrease emissions. Yeah, hopefully this was helpful for people. I'm excited to start prepping April. If anyone has any requests or any questions, put them in the comments below, and I will see you tomorrow.